Hi all, and welcome to the first in a series of videos around Warhammer Total War. Been really getting into this game. Just a bit of sort of background, I'm an old Warhammer player, been playing it for a long time, and I'm finding this version of Total War, especially the multiplayer, has been fantastic. Really good fun, lots of different challenges with the different lists. So I've been playing that more than the single player, and I've got quite good at it. I've got a few builds now that are working quite reliably for me that very rarely lose. And I've also noticed quite a lot about the way other people play, so what I've done here is put together a bit of a guide to attacking. The first half of it will be a bit of theory around attacking and what I think about when I'm building my army and what I'm looking to do in the game, and then the second half will be a sort of an example of that with a vampire counts list that I've been using really well, and a nice sort of tough battle I had with them that should show some of the principles and a slightly messy example really of how it works in the real world. So without further ado, we'll start on with the tactical brief. So I'm going to talk about the theory behind the two forms of attack in this game. One is line breaking and the other will be outflanking. This is going to be a bit of a theoretical discussion. Yes, you know, the examples are just to kind of talk through and get you thinking about what you do in your game. They're not concrete. Nothing goes as smooth as the way I talk about it in these diagrams here. So in the standard game, you line up, you've got your ranked up units, they've got their ranked up units, you run at them, you fight it out. Someone wins, someone loses. There's nothing really to it. You just feed it in reinforcements. If you've got a build that beats their build, you'll win. That's neither here nor there. And it's basically, if you're relying on your build to win, you're probably doing it wrong. So let's talk about a slightly better way to do this. So here's how I look at it when I'm building my list and breaking a line or trying to punch through a line. So what I'll have is I'll deploy my army about 3 ranks deep basically. The front line will be made up of cheap combat units like spearmen, zombies, something like that, something I don't mind losing. Their sole purpose is to move up and engage the enemy. We've got some combat units. These are, in my head, specialists, so things like great weapons, halberdiers, that kind of thing that are designed to defeat a specific opponent. And then finally, the line breakers. These are the big ass things designed to punch a hole, so Vargulfs, giants, steam tanks, anything like that. Now, in this case, you move up and engage with your cheap units. They hit the enemy's front line, and a couple of them get pushed back, because that's fine. They're supposed to. They're just cheap units, and some of them will get overwhelmed quite quickly. You know, maybe that's like the enemy's got great swords in the front line, for instance. But otherwise, you've held the line and you've formed the wall of battle. So once your enemy sort of pushes through, you start looking at feeding your combat units in. So you might look at this and go, well, you've got 2 breakthroughs here. This could be a unit of halberdiers, so you just chuck in your great weapons. This could be some monstrous creatures, so you send some halberdiers over there. And at this point I'm thinking, right, well, I've got to start pushing through now. Where do I want to break through? I've got this extra combat unit here, everyone's holding here, so since I'm feeding stuff in here, let's get this unit up and try and clear this flank and just support this flank. So that's the idea, move them up to engage and push through. So then you end up in hopefully a sort of nice situation where your combat units have came in, they've stabilised here where everyone was drawn, your addition of a combat units push through, and here you've kind of counter-attacked nice and hard and push them right back because you've put the right thing in against the right unit. Next, the enemy pushes back. This is what you've been waiting on there. They've committed their reinforcements now, they've committed the reserves, they've moved in to block off your pushes, they've thrown a bit in here to fight these cheap units and exploit that fact. At this point, and this is important to keep in mind, patience. Everyone when you seem to play this game rushes to commit everything. There's no need to rush to commit everything. Take your time, feed your reserves in a bit slower, pick the optimal situation to put them into. A lot of the time I find what makes a big difference is just putting pressure on your opponent and they panic and throw all their units against you. Don't do that, hold it back. You just need to put in enough to win the fight, you don't need to throw everything in. So at this point I've looked at the enemy line, I've went, okay, so the right flank's really weak, I've got some cheap units there that are holding-ish but they're probably going to go down. I've pushed up in the middle a bit. Where am I going to put my line breaker units? So in this case I thought, right, put them in the left flank. And generally you're looking at left or right flank. You can't put them through the centre, but I find it's better to put them in a flank. So shove them in a flank to support that side. and very quickly they'll just punch a hole straight through the enemy nice and hard. So even at this point your right flank's starting to collapse because you've only got the cheap units there. If your line breakers have come in nice and hard and fast, you should have pushed through that enemy unit, broken that flank, and at that point you just turn right and roll up their flank. Simples. I can't believe I said that, sorry. It is simple though on paper. In reality it's not nearly as nice or pretty, but that's the basis of it. You're looking to punch a hole and then roll up. You could have done that in the centre and then turned right, turned left, or turned both ways. It doesn't really matter. It's just about picking the right unit. So, you know, if you're looking to punch line breakers in that are like Vargils, don't punch them into a unit of halberdiers. You know, send in some guys with great weapons to deal with the halberdiers and send the Vargils into some spearmen or something like that, or swordmen that they can break. So it's always important to get the right matchup, because what you're looking to do when those line breakers come in is to hit the enemy hard and fast and overwhelm them before they get the chance to reposition or feed reserves in, anything like that. Just get them punched and then start rolling up the flank immediately to relieve the pressure of the fact that you've got these cheap crap units that will be at this point in pretty poor shape, and if not dead, will be breaking quite fast. So now we're going to talk about outflanking. So this is your standard Total War tactic 101. Get some units running around the side, charge them in the flank and rear, win the game. But it's never that simple, because your opponent's trying to stop you, and people generally don't actually seem to do it right a lot of the time. You know, I've made these mistakes myself, so I'm going to talk a little bit about flanking and how I deploy for it. So here's a standard sort of deployment in my head, how I go. I've got centre blocks that are designed, again, that's your anvil, that's to hold them, and then I've got my two outflanking forces. Now you could split them kind of evenly, but personally I like to stack one flank over another. So in this case the left hand flank is just a distraction. That's just going up there to force my opponent to look at many places, because distract them, you know, if maybe they'll not pay attention to that left flank and they'll be able to slip in somewhere to do damage, but otherwise it just keeps their mind occupied by having themselves being surrounded. On the right hand side I've put the majority of my units designed to stack it. I've also deployed them in this kind of diagonal line for a specific reason. If you deploy them in a flat horizontal line along here, as you move up you'll not be able to, this unit here the side would be able to charge, but the other units wouldn't, because they'd be blocked by that. And the same if you go in a column, the front unit basically blocks the other two units. So by going in a diagonal, if for some reason someone moves out to meet me, I can push all three units forward, or I can turn them all left, right. They can turn and gives a bit more room to manoeuvre. So in this case, for instance, what it meant was when I ordered them up, I just right clicked on the right flank and they rode up, and they'll end up roughly in a right formation to just make a 90-degree turn and charge. So as you can see here, we've moved up, we've got these flanking units deployed, we've got the left flanking unit coming up, and my opponent, being relatively sensible, has turned a couple of the units out to watch their flank. Now at this point I avoid the temptation just to rush everything in, and I push this reserve unit up. Normally this will be something quite hard hitting, into the centre line. The goal here again is to distract your opponent, get them looking away from your flanking forces for that kind of key moment you need them. So the unit moves up, starts crushing that, the opponent gets distracted, feeds in reinforcements to that unit. That's my kind of goal command. As soon as I see something like that moving, that means my opponent's taking his view off the flank and he's busy watching that fight. So then in come the flanking forces. So I'll, in this situation, as these forces commit there, I'd put one unit into the flank here, the other unit into this kind of guarding unit to hold it in place, and this guy I would run round the back. This unit at the same time I'd push this unit up in the left to start threatening, because, you know, as you can see here, these units are slowly getting beaten because they should be cheaper, and a lot of people seem to deploy quite good stuff in the front line. So then you end up with a bit of a messy situation. I've got some arrows here, but it's just to show you, you end up in a situation with a lot of options. So you've committed here now, you've got this right flank flanked, you've got these guys held down, this unit's been pushed up, he's got a couple of reserve units. This unit's currently still held in place because they have to face off with this unit. But you've got this free unit here, something hopefully hard hitting, and you've got a number of options. You can support this unit here and crush this to then free these guys up to flank. You can put them into the back of the big fight, you can jump this lone defensive reserve he's got, or you can even run over with this guy and crush this unit. Whereas this guy, again, you can go to this unit, or as I've done sometimes, if my opponent seems to be distracted and he's looking at the fight on the right hand side, just whack them in this flank and start rolling up from that side. So in this case, let's assume we're just going to put him into the back of the big fight, and this left unit will just hold that unit in place. So as soon as you whack this unit in, you're going to crush them. This, this is your big hitter. This is your Demi-Griff Knights, your Chaos Knights, something like that. Vargul's. Punch them in, wreck the enemy's face. Again, this side, you're now pretty much crumping this flank. So at this point, your opponent reacts. He starts to push his reserves in, but you've hit this unit so hard. In theory, you've basically broken them. And at this point, you're just looking to expand out from here, start rolling up the flank, deal with these units, because at this point they should have defeated the cheap things that you had holding them up. Start rolling up the flank there, punching out, and just basically breaking out to sandwich the opponent between the two flanking forces. Again, you start just turning into a nice messy fight where you've got all the little flanks, start outflanking again. There's no reason to stop straight away, you just start running round the next flank, can send them up for to deal with that, etc. And at that point you pretty much clear up. You've overwhelmed the key part of the line, you've sacrificed some cheap units that didn't really matter and weren't supposed to kill much, and your main combat units have came through relatively unscathed because you've used them in overwhelming numbers against a surrounded opponent. So that's a straightforward theory of outflanking. So for the final part, I'm just going to talk over a bit of general advice, things to keep in mind when you're deploying, picking your army and playing the game in general. So first one, have a battle plan. It doesn't need to be much of a plan, but who's going down the middle, who's going down the left, who's going down the right, what's going to punch through. Are you going to come in hard and fast, or are you going to take it nice and slow? The number of ways you can look at it, but just have a plan. Stick to the plan. Doesn't matter what your opponent does, stick to it. You've got a plan, go with it, see if it works. If it doesn't work, change it. The overall, there might be certain aspects of it you need to tweak as you go in, but overall, if you've got a plan, if you're going in hard and fast, go in hard and fast. If you're going to take a nice slow grind, take a nice slow grind. If you're going to go round the right flank, go round the right flank. Don't get too hung up on what your opponent's doing. Force the pace of the game. Force him to react to what you do. Don't react to what they do. Be patient. There's always this urge to run in and wreak havoc and get in all sorts of trouble and engage the opponent as quick as you can, but unless he's throwing out vast amounts of firepower, you don't need to run across the map, so just walk your troops across the map, take your time, scout out woods, scout out locations to make sure there's not an ambush waiting for you. And even when the fight starts, don't rush everything into an attempt to overwhelm the opponent. Take a moment to sort of wait, feed your units in a bit slowly, pick the right target. Distract your opponent. This is a really useful thing, and it's important to remember when you're fighting a human being, he can only be focused on one piece of the screen at a time. He's only managing one battle at a time. So throw stuff at him. Giant bats, for instance, are a great unit for that with the vamps. You just chuck them at stuff. Normally, just as my front line hits, I start running the giant bats in as well, going for cannons, wizards, whatever. Even if they're not going to win, it's something else to draw your opponent's attention and distract them. And sometimes people will overreact to things that if they just left alone, the unit would be that. So I've put giant bats into spearmen before. They win the flank, but the spearman was always going to win that fight. But it distracted my opponent. He turns around, he runs another unit in there. That's great. They're not looking at the main fight. They're not looking where your other units are coming from. So it's important to remember the person looking at the screen is only looking at the one place at the one time. So if you see them micro in a particular fight, look to hit them elsewhere at that time when they're not looking elsewhere. If that makes sense. Final tip, get the matchups, get the right matchups. So what do I mean by that? Well, pole arms, get them in against knights and large targets. If you see a pole arm unit, put your swordsmen into it. Great weapons against armoured units. I found when I started playing initially, having a good plan and following it worked for me to some degree, and I was winning quite comfortably. But when I moved to the next level of really sort of focusing on what's charging against what rather than sort of thinking in broad strokes, it's made a massive difference. So especially folk love the halberdiers within the Empire list. Make sure you've got a couple of units whose sole purpose is to kill halberdiers. So for instance, if I'm Vamps, I've got ghouls. If I'm in Chaos, I've got Forsaken. And they suffer no penalty for really fighting the pole arms, so they can go in and just waste them. Swordsmen, that kind of thing. By the same token though, you making sure to use your pole arms against the large creatures makes a massive difference. Those things do go down really quickly if you're hitting them with the right weapon. And great weapons are a good kind of middle ground, because they're good against everything to some degree. The only thing they're rubbish against is lightly armoured things. So especially if you're fighting dwarfs or warriors of chaos, you want to make sure you've got some great weapons just to do some tin opening duty for you. So that's just been a general sort of walkthrough around the plans and a bit of general advice. What I'm going to do is now I'll also upload a second video which will just be the current vamp build I'm using, and also got sort of an example of both types of attack, because within this list I use both sort of line breaking and outflanking, and it matches sort of what you see in some of the slides. So I'll put that up as another video, and I'll link to it in the description, and hopefully get something, one of the fancy clickable links on the screen. You can have a wee watch through that, and you can see the tactics and some of the thinking I've spoke about here in action. Right, catch you later.